Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the United Democratic Volunteers of Alabama's Blue School. Just a quick note, if you have a question, either raise your hand or put it in the chat and we'll address it during the discussion. Tonight, we're going to be talking about potential candidates and the people who recruit them. And we're fortunate to have Tabitha Isner with us. She's a dedicated organizer and an advocate for those who worked closely with candidates across our states. And so please join me in welcoming Tabitha.
Thank you, Melanie. I will go ahead and share my screen, and while that's coming up, I will also just note I ran for Congress myself in 2018, and I am the vice chair of the Alabama Democratic Party, and so I support candidates in that role as well. Um, and yeah, so happy to help folks. So I'm going to talk about finding or becoming a candidate. So whether you yourself are thinking you're going to be the candidate or whether you are wanting to recruit other people, either way, this will hopefully be useful to you. And thank you to UD Val for inviting me. Okay, so how does a candidate emerge? There are three ways that I think of a candidate emerging. One is self-selection. That's where the person is identifying themselves and saying, I want to run for something. The second is when the party recruits someone, and the party recruits primarily for seats that we think are competitive or seats that we think are important in terms of helping other candidates on the ballot. So, for example, it's really important to have a gubernatorial candidate and as many of the statewide candidates as possible. Those help to drive turnout in local elections and state legislative elections. When we don't have a candidate at the top of the ticket, we tend to not have as many successful candidates down ticket. So we don't recruit for every single race. It's important to remember that there are hundreds of races happening each cycle. So the party is not recruiting for every single seat at the state level. County parties also do recruitment. When I say party recruitment, I mean county parties as well. And congressional districts may also do their own recruiting. And then community recruitment is when people within a community uh, try to figure out who would be someone good and kind of identify that person. So even without knowing all of you individually, I know that any and all of you could participate in community recruitment. You don't need a title, you don't need a position, you don't need experience. What you have is the ability to look around your community, know what your community needs, and know the people in your community to know who would be a strong candidate. Welcome, Leslie. So which seats should you be running for or recruiting for? So as you get started thinking about this, some of the key questions you want to ask are whether there are any seats in your area that are winnable. You want to look at who is the incumbent for those seats and also who has run before for those seats. So someone who ran recently may be willing to run again with a little encouragement. Someone who ran for one seat might be willing to run for a different one with a little encouragement. So seeing who's already got experience in that race. You want to know how much is typically spent on the race. And this is because as you go to talk to a candidate, the more information you can provide someone about the race that they're thinking about getting into, the more likely they're going to take that conversation seriously. So they need to know how much money it's going to cost. And the best way to know is to look at how much is typically spent on the race. And you'll want to look at a time when the race was contested. It's usually the best way to figure out the appropriate budget. And you want to look over several years because it does vary year to year depending on who's running. And the incumbent usually has a lot more money than a challenger does, but it gives you at least a range of financial amounts that you might be looking at. You also want to think about what kind of work the position does. So, it's if it's a public service or a public library board, then someone who has some kind of connection to libraries or education is a better choice. Um, and if you're looking at a state ledge job, that might be good for someone who already has some experience doing something else in government. So just think about what kind of work it is. And then important to think about what's the time commitment and the salary of the position that you're looking at. So some positions are full time and you're going to be expected to, for example, for Congress, for US Congress, you're expected to live half time in DC. That's a really big commitment for someone to make, and it's a full-time job, but it comes with a big full-time salary. So that's a very different thing than, say, a state legislative position where you're not going to make as much money. You're going to be going to Montgomery for 10 weeks or so of the year, but the rest of the year is it's a little less clear whether you could have a job or not have a job in addition to being a state legislator. City council, county commissions, public school boards. If those meetings don't fit into your life, then you're probably not the right person to run for that position. So it's important to make sure people know what they're signing up for ahead of time. And if you're recruiting, it's really helpful if you can have those answers already in your back. All right, so we definitely want to discern a fit between the candidate and the race. So if you're the candidate, you want to know what your goal is in running, what you're hoping to accomplish by running. And I'll talk a little bit more about potential goals you can have. You want to know if you're legally qualified to run. So for some positions, you have to have lived in your district for a particular amount of time, or you have to live in the state for a particular amount of time. There are age requirements. So getting clarity on all those requirements is important. You also want to consider whether you're professionally qualified, by which I mean, do you have enough experience in your professional life that you feel like you could do this job successfully? And I don't think everybody needs to be an attorney. I don't think you have to be already, in this field. But, start to identify who has sort of the professional experience, the life experience, that would best serve this position. You want to think about whether you're mentally prepared, financially prepared, spiritually prepared to do this. Campaigning is not easy. It is really stressful. It is time consuming. It is costly. So important to consider whether you have the resources you would need, or if you don't, how you would get those resources. Um, and, having a support system around you is a really important part of that. Um, and don't just assume you know who's going to support you. You'll need to talk to people about that. Okay, so what could be your goal? Typically, what we think of is your goal in a campaign is to win. That's the most obvious one. In which case you're trying to get more votes than your opponent. You're trying to assume the seat, hold that position. That's the obvious one, but it is not the only goal you can have in running for office. So another reason to run for office is to build name recognition. So you can do this. It's a way that sometimes people get to know their community and help their community to recognize them and their name and what they stand for. Sometimes so that they can run later, sometimes for other personal purposes. But it is a reason that sometimes people run is to build that name recognition for a future project. You can run to push a particular issue. So if the incumbent isn't handling something the way you'd want them to, you could run and make them have to face that issue and talk about that issue. So a great example of this is Alexandra Braswell. She has brought up some issues in the community, and the incumbent, no, I'm saying the wrong one. Anyway, there is a seat where the incumbent, because they're being threatened, um, is changing his position on a bill that he just sponsored this last session, sponsored a bill, passed the bill, and because there's pressure, he is changing his position and trying to undo the bill that he passed. That's a great example of like impacting policy, impacting a particular issue by making it a campaign issue.
It's
Give my
Garland
favorite.
Dodger.
Thank you. I was like,
Nope, I got it.
thank you. Susan's on point. You can also run to till the soil. So this is what I was thinking of when I ran. I was trying to till the soil. I knew that I wasn't going to win my race for the second congressional district back in 2018, but I wanted to be preparing the community for the next candidate, building the capacity of the community to respond better to the next campaign. So strengthening county parties, strengthening networks of volunteers, so that eventually that district would become winnable and the community would be ready to gather around, organize around a candidate who could win. A fifth goal you could have in a campaign is to conduct research. So you could run a campaign just to find out whether door knocking is more or less effective than phone banking or more or less effective than mailers. You could run experiments. You could find out which precincts have higher or lower turnout. And this is particularly helpful in districts where we haven't had a Democrat run in a while. So one example would be Senate District 5, where Ryan Cagle ran. We haven't had a Democrat run in that seat in a long time. And one of the effects of that is that we don't know who might could vote Democrat if there was a candidate. So him running, he wasn't going to win that seat, but it provided a lot of helpful data to see who showed up for the Democratic primary and voted in the Democratic primary, to see who showed up for that special election is really valuable data for future efforts, so that we are better able to identify people who vote Democrat at least some of the time. So these are all perfectly good reasons to run a campaign. And of course, winning is always ideal. But if there's a race that you don't think you can win, you might consider whether you're interested in any of these other goals and setting a goal for yourself that is still productive. Okay, so if you're thinking about running or talking to someone about running, there's some things you should do before you announce your candidacy. Um, for one, you want to get as many people in the loop as possible before you announce publicly. And I say that because um, human nature is such that, human psychology is such that people are more excited when they know about something before it happens. Like surprise parties are fun, not just for the person who's being surprised, but for all the people who get to participate in the planning and feel like they have a very exciting secret. So, and people will feel more invested in you when they feel like they were part of bringing you to the forefront. They were part of launching your campaign. So the more people that you can get as part of your secret crew before you announce, the more strong allies you're going to have throughout the campaign. And no one likes to be surprised. No one, especially people in politics, don't like to have to admit that they didn't know someone was going to run. They want to be in the know. So get them in the know. You also want to be able to make a big splash when you announce your campaign. And if you can have all of your materials ready to go, then your day one announcement, you can come out really strong. You can have a press release, you can have an event, you can have all sorts of things at the ready, including a nice logo, a website, whatever. As much as you can get done ahead of time, it makes your launch very exciting. Now, if you can't do that, and oftentimes there are some reasons why you might not be able to do that. You can also have a campaign launch at a later point. You can relaunch your campaign multiple times. But it's, as much as you can have an exciting launch, that's good for press. So you want to make good use of the time that you have before you announce your candidacy, and you don't need to rush into that. So two major things you need to do before you announce: establish your strategy and take care of getting your ducks in a row. So in terms of strategy, you need to have a team, specifically a treasurer and a chair, but a bigger team is better. The more people, again, who feel like they're in on the ground floor and investing in you, the better. You need to research the district so that on day one, when somebody says to you, where is that district? Where is HD 38? You can give them a really specific answer and show that you're already knowledgeable about the district that you're wanting to serve. You need to also know things like, what are the major industries, or what are the major issues at hand in this district? You want to know what your goal is. You are not necessarily telling people what your goal is. Publicly, the goal is always to win. But you need to know for yourself what your goal is, because your strategy will depend on what your ultimate goal is in your campaign. And then you make a campaign plan and timeline that will help you to achieve that goal. So say, for example, your goal was that you want to increase, you might say that you're tilling the soil and you want to increase turnout in the 4 lowest turnout precincts by at least 5 points. So you would identify your campaign plan would involve identifying those precincts where you want to have an impact and identifying what their current baseline level of turnout is so that you can set a goal for increasing that turnout. And a timeline. Highly encourage people to make a plan, work the plan, don't get distracted by all the things that go on. There's a lot of shiny objects to distract you, but the more you can have a plan in advance, the more likely you are to stick to it. Make an ideal budget for how much it would cost to do all the things that you want to do. And then also make a bare minimum budget of, what's the bare minimum that you would still feel good about, so that you know sort of what your bare minimum for fundraising is and what your stretch goal is. You also want to learn the rules for compliance so that you're not planning things that are not allowed. We'd hate to see you getting in trouble with anybody, and we know darn well that the Republicans will call us out if we break any rules, even though they don't call their own folks out. All right. Also, sort of the brass tacks of what you have to get done. You need to be paying attention to the deadline for qualifying. That's the paperwork that you file with this county party or state party. You need to pay attention to filing. So that's the forms that you fill out with the state secretary of state or with the Federal Election Commission. And there's a statement of economic interest or a personal ethics statement about your finances. So you need to know when the deadlines are for all of those kinds of forms. I recommend you get a PO box. You'll need to get an EIN, establish your principal campaign committee, get a bank account, all the sort of brass tacks stuff. And creating a brand, getting, a designer or someone to put together a nice logo for you and materials. And as much of that as can be designed in advance is helpful for making that big splash at your announcement. Okay, so once you've announced the phases of campaigning. So in the first however many months of the campaign, at the beginning of things, your number one task is to raise money. I don't like that this is true. None of us like the influence of money in politics. Well, maybe some people do, but I don't like it. I would love to get money out of politics. I would love to overturn Citizens United. I would love to put better caps on fundraising. But the reality is you're going to need money to run a good, strong campaign. So it may be 9 months or 12 months of your campaign that really the number one thing you're doing is trying to raise money. It's not fun. It's not the fun part of campaigning generally, but it's really important. You also want to expand your network, by which I mean, if you know 500 people in your community today, you need to double or triple that as quickly as possible. Just make sure you know more and more and more people and that you're meeting more and more and more people. Expanding your name recognition. regardless of what you're trying to do, you're going to need some name recognition in order for folks to tick the box next to your name. All right. So then in the last 2 months of the campaign is where you shift gears. And there is, of course, room to be trying to do some persuasion, earlier in your campaign, but the sad reality is that most people are not paying attention to elections until 90 days or less before the election happens. So the bulk of your persuasion work, persuading people to vote for you who wouldn't otherwise, the bulk of that is going to happen in the 90, really the 60 days, maybe 90 days before an election. And GOTV, that's our fancy acronym for Get Out the Vote. That is the effort to remind people when voting is happening, where it's happening, help them make a plan to be off of work, help them figure out transportation, all of that stuff. That's really most effective in the last 14 days. Again, we wish people planned further in advance, but they don't. So we kind of have to meet people where they are. And that's when GOTV is most effective. Again, we often do some of this before then, but that's when it's most effective. So to do that, we're knocking doors, we're making calls, we're running ads, but the bulk of your money is going to be spent in these last 2 months of the campaign. So sort of hoarding your money up until that point is a big challenge, but it's important to make sure that you have the resources you need to make a big push towards the end of the campaign. Okay, so common mistakes. I've said some of these already. Assuming that you don't need much money. Unfortunately, you do. Assuming that you can't raise money, you can. You definitely can. It's not anybody's favorite task, but there are people who are willing to help you figure out how to do that. That'll be a different training session. I won't go into too much detail on that today. But yeah, not spending time on fundraising and spending your money too early. These are some of the most common mistakes that I see. Obsessing over yard signs is it's so hard because people really want them. I know people love yard signs, but making sure that you're spending your money really strategically. And that's where having that campaign plan and that campaign budget is so helpful because you'll already know from the very beginning of your campaign, where you want to devote your time and energy and money. And it's probably better spent on other things besides yard signs. Another common mistake is talking to the same people over and over again. Going to the county party meeting is really important because those folks are your support system. But if you're only seeing those same people at every event that you go to, you're not really expanding your network. You're not really meeting new people, expanding name recognition, etc. So it's really important to find ways to meet people that you wouldn't otherwise know in your community. Another mistake is spending too much time on your policy platform. Again, most people do not engage in politics that way. Most people they vote straight ticket, they vote the Dem or the R. Some people pay more attention, but the research shows that people tend to vote based on vibes more than on specific policy proposals. With a big asterisk on that, which is to say having a signature policy proposal can be very effective. For example, Marilyn Lands ran on reproductive choice, and she made that the centerpiece of her campaign, and it worked very well to get her elected. But most of us are unable to say what Kamala Harris's policy positions, specific policy proposals were. Most people did not go and read her website. So make sure that you don't spend too much time on getting the perfectly written policy proposal. That's not what makes or breaks a campaign. I'll also say don't spend too much time pursuing endorsements from PACs or celebrities. There's not a lot of PAC money spent on Democrats in Alabama. not on challengers anyway. So don't spend too much time pursuing those. They can take up a whole lot of time. Those organizations often are willing to let you pursue them and pursue them and pursue them, and they won't necessarily give to you even after all of the work that you've put in. So just be careful about how much time you put on that. And if y'all have questions, I encourage you to put them in the chat, and I will take questions at the end of the slide deck. All right, so how can you support a candidate? So a candidate needs, I think of these 5 basic kinds of support. Candidates need cheerleaders, and these are like the people who tell you that you're doing a good job. And these are likely to be the friends and family members of the candidate, but it's also nice if some of them are not friends and family members. For example, on my campaign, there was this guy named Patty Quinn, and he came to my initial campaign kickoff event, and he was this fatherly type. He was about the age to be my father, and he stood in the back and he looked at me like a proud dad every single event that I did. And he came to all the events and he sat in, I mean, he already knew where I stood on everything. He knew he was going to support me, but he just kept coming to events and looking at me adoringly and clapping excitedly. And then he would call me later and tell me what a good job I did. My mental health was significantly better because of Patty Quinn. Like, so if you want to support a candidate and help them to continue forward, like they need some people in their life who are cheerleaders for them, supporting them, reminding them what a good job they're doing, encouraging them to keep going. So please do that. Candidates do need to have some advisors or accountability partners. And what I mean by that is someone who can say, who is part of the strategic plan, knows what the plan is and what the budget is, and is holding the candidate accountable to sticking with the plan. So there are probably going to be monthly or weekly meetings of your team. And if you're on a candidate's core team, you should be helping them to stay on track, not get distracted, and giving them good advice about where to put their energy and their time. Candidates also need fundraisers. The job of a fundraiser is to identify people who might be willing to give and to ask those people to either make the donation right away or to meet the candidate so that the candidate can make the request. And they also can hold fundraising events. And again, we can go into a lot more detail on fundraising. But one of the problems we have here in Alabama among Democrats is that it has been a while since we haven't had a lot of strong candidates raising a lot of money. So we don't have a culture of fundraising. We don't have a lot of people, I would say outside of Birmingham and Huntsville, who are accustomed to being asked to come to a fundraiser and write a check for $500 to get in the door. But that is a cultural thing. So it's a culture that we can change. We can get people used to the idea that you give money to a candidate. I certainly know many of my friends when I was running said to me, I've never given money to a candidate before. And I had to tell them like a typical gift to a candidate, would be 100 or 500 or as much as 5,000. And they were, oh my gosh, I didn't know I didn't know people gave money like that. So educating people, you can be a great advocate for a candidate by educating people about why the candidate needs money and how much money it's appropriate to give. And it's not $10. Darn it. I mean, we like $10 too, but teach people who have some money that it is appropriate to write a bigger check. And of course, we need volunteers to help with field work. That's the knocking on doors and the phone banking type stuff. and we need volunteers to work on administrative tasks. So if you're good at, you know, keeping track of spreadsheets, managing a calendar, that sort of thing, you can volunteer to help with that sort of work. And networkers, if you know a ton of people that don't know the candidate, like get to work introducing them, making sure that the candidate knows which events in the community are worth attending. Um, they're not going to know about a community group meeting if they're not familiar with the community group, but you are. So take the time to give a candidate a list of all of the groups that you're a part of and that you'd be willing to introduce them to expand their network. Okay, here's a controversial one. What support does the party provide? So the party hopefully is being a cheerleader. I will at least be a cheerleader as a party officer. I will be cheerleading and encouraging, and I try to stay in touch with candidates and let them know that I'm excited for them and supportive of what they're doing. But the party can do that part. The party can provide some training. We have limited resources at the state party, but the party does provide some training. The party can help with networking. So if you need someone's phone number, for example, maybe you're running for county commission and you want to get connected with your state rep, who's a Democrat, like the party can help facilitate making an introduction to other Democrats in your area. Once you're the nominee, you get some more perks. So Vote Builder, which is the software that gives you access to the list of voters in your area and which ones are likely to vote for you already, which ones will need to be persuaded, plus their addresses and phone numbers. All of that is in Vote Builder, and you get free access once you're the Democratic nominee. Once you're the nominee, you may be invited to participate in a joint fundraising campaign. A joint fundraising campaign is when the party sends out an email and they say, we're raising money in support of Lee McInnes, and we're going to split any money that comes in from this email, we'll split between the state party and the candidate. So the state party can do that. It can raise money via a joint fundraising campaign. But keep in mind that the state party has hundreds of candidates that are running in 2026, and they cannot financially support candidates. The only time the party generally will support a candidate directly, like give a candidate money, is like, let me back up and say there are rules that we have to follow. So there are no PAC to PAC transfers in Alabama. And thank you, Susan. Susan taking care of me in the chat. So there are some limits on who can give you money and how much. But the state party could support a candidate, but they typically only do that when there's additional money coming in. And that usually happens when there's an exciting candidate. So like when Doug Jones was running for Senate, people could only give so much money to Doug Jones, and then they would give some more money to the state party with the assumption that supporting the state party would also mean supporting Doug Jones. So same thing with Shamari Figures. That was a big race that had national attention. So there was a lot of money coming into the party. And that energy was focused around the Shamari Figures campaign. But typically, and this is not just Alabama, typically state parties are not giving money to candidates. And they might, however, do a coordinated campaign. I should have put that up here. A coordinated campaign is when the party helps to coordinate among people who are running on a slate of candidates. So again, this would be once you're a nominee, but if we have a slate of statewide candidates, which I hope we will, and a slate of state legislative candidates, those candidates could run together and coordinate on some things, share some resources, because it's a little bit silly to have the gubernatorial candidate having staff or volunteers knocking on doors, and also the lieutenant governor candidate has people knocking on doors, and so does the Secretary of State. And it's like, we don't all need to knock the same doors. We need to coordinate. So there may be some coordination provided by the party, but don't expect for the state party to fund you as a candidate. The county parties sometimes make donations to candidates. But again, depends on if they have any money, and they typically are not supporting every candidate on their ballot financially. All right, what about staff? So let me start by saying for many small races, there is no staff. So if you're looking at a smaller race, a more local race, think of this as, when should you outsource to a volunteer or friend? And uh, you know, when your time is limited, is a little bit tongue in cheek, because your time is always limited as a candidate, right? Like, the most important thing that you can do as a candidate is shake hands and smile and talk to with people. That's something only you can do. You can't outsource that to anybody else. And so your time is always going to be limited as a candidate. So anything that you can outsource to someone else is a good idea to do so. You can't outsource being charming and delightful. Only you, the candidate, can charm and delight. And you can't outsource much of your fundraising. Some things you can, but making that ask, when the candidate asks someone for money, it typically results in more money than someone else asking for money. So your time is always limited as a candidate, so look for help. Also look for help when your knowledge is limited. So if you aren't familiar with social media, find someone else to be in charge of your social media. If you aren't knowledgeable about buying TV ads, like, don't try to learn marketing. Don't try to learn digital marketing. Don't try to figure out how Facebook ads work. Don't try to become a TikTok star while running for office. Like, now is not the time to learn. While you're a candidate is the time to be doing. So if you don't already have the skill, outsource that to somebody else. Let people help you. And then also when your access is limited. So this is true when it comes to fundraising, for example. I don't have Steve Jobs's phone number. So I had to outsource getting wealthy people's phone numbers. I had to hire someone who could get me phone numbers for wealthy people. If you don't have access, another example is, as a white woman, I don't have access to the Black community in the same way that someone who's more connected in Montgomery's Black community would. So I hired someone who could be in charge of making sure that I was at the right events in the Black community. She knew all of the Black pastors with prominent churches in Montgomery and got me scheduled to attend all of those churches. So my access is limited. When access is limited, you need to find someone else to help you. Typically, these are the positions that you might consider hiring for, or position titles you might give to a volunteer. A finance director is the person who would help you fundraise. And typically that's someone who has a list of rich people's phone numbers and can make that introduction, or at least give you the right phone number to call for wealthy people who might give to a candidate like you. And that's their specialty, right? Like, they're the ones who are supposed to know who would be a good option for you. So a finance director will help you with that. They can also wrangle you and force you to sit down and make those phone calls to raise money, which can be really useful because it's a painful process without someone to make you do it. A campaign manager, is someone who manages the big picture and make sure that all the trains are running on time for your campaign. So they would be in charge of keeping track of whether there are enough push cards available and making sure that you're keeping everything on your timeline and managing your calendar. If you don't want a campaign manager to be that in charge, you might consider instead doing an executive assistant where you would be the manager. You would be the one in charge calling the shots as the candidate, and your assistant would do the tasks that you need done. So I've seen it done both ways, and I think the bigger the campaign, the more likely that you have a campaign manager. But again, just know yourself and know what you'll try to know what you'll respond well to. Marketing consultants, I don't know hardly anyone who knows how to do digital marketing without hiring a consultant. So highly recommend that. A field director is someone who would manage your volunteers and manage knocking on doors, making phone calls, etc. And that's really important. Managing volunteers is a lot of work because volunteers aren't going to show up for work on time. They're not going to show up consistently. Just because they signed up doesn't mean they'll show up. It's a lot of reminding and rewarding that a field director or volunteer manager would do. And a scheduler would just be someone to manage your schedule, find events that you need to be at, and get you scheduled to attend them. All right. So I want to talk a little, zoom back, way back to the beginning of this conversation and talk about how you might nurture an eventual candidate and what to look for in a candidate. Preparation to be a great candidate really can take years. And there's a lot that we would want out of a candidate. No one's going to have everything that I'm going to list for you of great qualities to have in a candidate. But you can start looking for people who have some of those things, and you can help them fill in the gaps where there's stuff that they're missing. So this is my list of what makes a good candidate. I'm looking for someone who's really dedicated to the community's needs and motivated by that. And so again, that's often someone who's willing to run even if they're not able to win a seat because they understand that it's still meeting a community need. They're people who are less concerned about their ego and more concerned about what the people around them need. And they're able to make those hard calls and able to put the community's needs ahead of their own. So that's one. Two, I think a good candidate has a track record of involvement or service in the community and expertise in the content. So if you are wanting to be on the school board, I should be able to Google you and see that you have been at school board meetings before, spoken at school board meetings before, advocated for something education related. You should have some record of having been involved in your community. That's going to give you a lot more credibility as a candidate. A good candidate needs to be hardworking. Campaigning is a slog. There's a lot of parts of it that seem really fun, but the truth is there's a lot of it that's just a boring slog. Like fundraising, it's not fun. It's exhausting. Um, you know, getting up early in the morning in order to be at a breakfast event, it's not fun. Staying up late in order to talk to all the people who are calling you. Like it can be really exhausting. Dealing with trolls on social media. There's so many things about this that aren't fun. And to me, a good candidate is someone who can keep themselves together and keep working even when it's tough. Communication skills are really important. The ability to tell a compelling story about why it matters who you elect. So, what are the things that are happening in the community? Ideally, it's someone who can say, I know a woman in my neighborhood who's having such problems with her water treatment that she has to, straight pipe out of her house. And, no one who in this community should have to do that. And that's really the fault of ADECA and its policies. Like being able to tie together someone's lived experience with a policy issue is a powerful communication tool. And we often know who the people are who can Tell that compelling story. Fifth thing that I'm looking for in a good candidate is somebody who understands the political game. Again, this is one where often people don't um, have this already. Someone who you're thinking about running for office, or if you're thinking about running for office. But this is a great thing to start working on, filling this gap before you run for office. You can learn it on the fly. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's really helpful if you know something about who the players are, what the dynamics are between people, who's going to want to have their ring kissed. And I don't think you have to kiss the ring, but I do think you need to know who's expecting you to kiss their ring, and be able to make a plan for how you're going to manage those sorts of dynamics. And to know who's likely to give you money and not give you money is, again, part of understanding the political game. Focus and discipline is number 6. Primarily here, I'm thinking about the ability to make a plan and work your plan, not getting distracted. So I'll give you one example. I know a candidate who, in the middle of the campaign, they got an anonymous letter that said, "Your opponent is having an affair. You should make a big fuss about it because they're running on family values." Now, what you could do in that moment is drop everything that you've got planned and start dedicating all of your time to spreading rumors about an affair. But if your plan for your campaign was to talk about transportation, like it's not within the plan to start talking about affairs. So can you have the focus and the discipline to not get distracted by someone saying your candidate's weak on this issue, or your opponent is weak on this issue, or there's this opportunity coming up you could make a fuss about? You do have to be flexible to an extent, but also like don't be so easily distractible that you forget what your plan was. All right, number 7, being experienced as a manager, negotiator, and executive. If you're running for an executive position like mayor, you should have some executive experience. If you're running to be part of a team like the legislature where you're going to have to negotiate, you should have some experience negotiating and community building. So have some experience, find ways to get that experience. Maybe it's serving on a board, but the more you can talk about what makes you prepared for this job, the better. 8th is a practical problem-solving orientation. If you're someone who seems to fly off the handle and be very good at pointing at problems, but not very good at solving them, you're probably not going to appeal to a lot of folks. Being team-oriented and able to delegate and trust others is number 9. And I say that because your campaign is a team effort. And if you can't delegate to others and trust others, your campaign will fail. You are not enough. You don't have enough hours in your day to do all of the things your campaign is going to require. So you're going to have to be able to build a team. And last but not least, I think a good candidate is someone who has worked on other campaigns and has a history of supporting other candidates. It's going to be a whole lot easier for you to ask for support if you have already given it at some previous time in the past. So if you have not already worked on someone's campaign or been involved, I hope you will get involved in someone else's campaign to learn about it and have the experience of what it's like from both sides. All right. Those are all of the slides that I have. We have 10 minutes left. If anyone has questions, something that I didn't cover, I'm happy to try to do that now. A big thanks to UDVal for hosting me, and my contact information is there on the screen if you want to contact me.
I thought it was great, Tabitha.
Thank you.
And I train on this stuff too, but you touched on some things that are it's just beyond some of the plan, some of the more well, it was very interesting. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. I'm glad. Any other questions, comments, things I missed?
Richard and I have been talking about having a training on your image, a candidate, how they dress, and so forth. We've run across a few situations where some candidates don't understand that they're trying to have a broad appeal, and they're not going to win this. Oh well, anyway, maybe
Yeah.
that's another training we'll do.
Yeah. Well, and I think, authenticity is an interesting
Oh, absolutely.
no,
Yeah.
no. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I was just talking about this at Netroots, that like, Randall Woodfin is an interesting example where like I wouldn't some of the things that Randall does, I wouldn't have recommended a candidate do. But like he has a brand. Like we all kind of know what to expect from Randall Woodfin, and he sticks with it. So he's not toning it down, but he's not ratcheting it up. Like there's a range at which Mayor Woodfin operates, and I think um, figuring out who you are, who you're going to be on the campaign trail, can be really difficult. But like locking in on, are you going to be the candidate who always says howdy? Are you going to be the candidate that has, quirky little metaphors? Are you going to be the candidate who always speaks with like a serious hand motion? Like having something that's your brand that people are like, oh, you know the guy, the one who's always, or the lady who's always got, Sue Bell Cobb always has her glasses up here. Like, I bet someone at some point said, you know, maybe you should take your glasses off. But it became a Sue Bell Cobb calling card. And I think that's a really interesting um, lesson in branding.
Well, again, we don't want people to not be their authentic self, but we
Yeah,
do want them to have a broad appeal.
right. Well, that's what I mean about like there's authentic, and then there's also like, yes, be authentic, but also be consistent and like have a broad appeal. Like those are it's funny that we like what we mean by authentic is not like just do whatever the heck you want in the moment. That's not what we mean by authentic. Like have a way of being that people can count on that does seem genuine. Like don't put on airs. But it's got to be appropriate as well. I hear you. I'm trying to agree with you, Susan.
I know, and I'm trying not to be too specific because we have a real specific situation right now. So,
Well, any other comments or
Yeah,
questions?
yeah. Hey, Tabitha, it's Lee McInnes.
Haley?
Hey, could somebody put together and this isn't necessarily for me because I briefed and did speeches my entire life, so I'm pretty good at thinking on my feet. But I've
Hmm.
seen a couple of candidates running this cycle. They got what I thought were really softball questions they should know the answers to,
Mm,
and already have mapped out, like why are you running? If there could be a list of top 10 questions that you're gonna have an answer to, that would be helpful for some people. I've already, just the way my mind works, I've already worked through as many of those as possible. But I've seen a couple of people running in some very high visibility, races that have just gotten flattened by questions that, like tell us your story, and and,
right.
and just had to struggle through
A
that.
great
So
point.
so I think that might help. Again, I could talk for an hour about, just ask what I had for breakfast, but other people might need to practice and rehearse that and get those down pat so they don't struggle through those really easy questions.
Yeah. And that goes back to the branding piece that like your answer to why you're running should be the same every time you answer. It doesn't seem authentic if it changes all the time. So there needs to be some consistency in the way that you address things. And I pulled up this document just to say that if you are interested in more of the brass tacks of this, I have sent this document to every candidate that I've talked to. And it just, includes links to like, how do you find out what seats are available to you? How do you check that you are qualified to run for the seat you're interested in? What's the process for qualifying, which is just the forms we fill out with the state party. So it has all the kind of details in here. And it's good, just little handout and some ideas for website companies that are cheap. Because again, I spent way too much money on my website and I regret it. And I want you all to learn from my mistakes. But yeah, let's plan to expand this, and that's a great point that I'll add in, Lee.
Does anybody have any other questions? Yes, Marcia.
It's not a question. It's just thank you. And I appreciate you distilling this into an hour. That was quite the skill.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know it's a lot of info. So thank you all for persevering.
Thanks,
All right, well,
everybody.
With that, we can wrap up tonight. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you, Tabitha, for teaching us everything we need to know. And our next Blue School will be on September 16th. And I hope to see everybody there.
Thanks, y'all.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.